the whole idea was how do we pitch before we even build, actually. Operations teams inside, a lot of delivery, logistics, mobility companies, like companies that have their operations on the ground, they don't have a SaaS product that is specialized for them. We felt like all of them had, specific tools that are built for their needs and their workflows. That is how the idea of Locale was born. Even though we expanded internationally with that product, even in international customers, we realized that the data was not really of that good quality for us to even give that kind of insight. Throughout my journey with Locale, I was never once told that this is not a real problem. But what I realized was that sometimes problems exist, but people are not willing to pay enough to solve that.
Welcome back to another episode of the Sandbox Show. Today we have with us Aditi Sinha. Before I get into a formal introduction, I'll just get into the flow of what she did earlier. I think that'll speak for itself. Welcome to the show, Aditi.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure to be
Yeah,
here.
same here. I'm looking forward to our conversation and I hope the audience will enjoy as well. I'll start with you did an economics degree back in BITS, right? That itself is a little bit different than I see all engineering bros from BITS Pilani, right?
Yes.
You started with economics and BITS and then you went on to try your hand at entrepreneurship very early,
Yes.
right? Probably you were, what, 21?
23.
23.
Yeah.
And then you went on to build the venture that we're going to talk about in a while
Yes.
for around 5 to 6 years.
Yes.
You raised around as well, around 6 million, if I'm
Yes.
not wrong.
Yes.
And then it made good ARR as well. 1.8, 1.9
Yes,
is
in
those figures.
approximately,
Right,
yeah.
Yeah. You're also a Forbes 30 under 30. A lot of honor of badges that way, right? A couple of things that people take years and years to build, kind of figure out and do. You seem to have got it right in the first time. And I've been talking to a lot of my friends and the founders out there because I'm from product and I interact with a lot of founders as well, and B2B enterprise space especially. They spend years, they're still trying to spend years and years, months and months figuring out if the idea that they're solving for is right or wrong. How did you get it right in the first time?
I don't think, honestly, we got it right primarily because, we did reach a certain milestone and certain matrix, but, we raised, for our first idea, we actually raised a seed round. And when you get on an institutional investor on your cap table, you're expected to grow at a certain rate. Right? But in our case, what happened was, again, because we were so young when we started this company, I didn't even honestly know how to really, account for the market size of the idea. So, when we started executing on the idea, we realized that the market that we had originally picked was very small, much smaller than we had initially accounted for.
Okay.
Which is why we had to pivot from the first idea to the second idea. So, I think on one hand, you can surely say that it was successful, but I would say from the venture matrix standpoint, I won't call it a successful idea.
We'll talk about pivots in a while because
Sure.
there's a lot of insights to unpack
Yeah.
there. As you said, the TAM, what it stood for,
Yes.
market forces. Whenever you go to VC, there's always a certain type of pressure that comes anyways.
Right.
But you said for your first idea. So let's talk about your very first MVP that you pitched and you thought would work.
Yes.
And you said V. So did
Yes.
you have a co-founder?
Yes, I did. So, in my final year of college, I was interning in a startup, actually, because we are supposed to do an internship that actually accounts for our credits. So
Right.
that's where I met my co-founder, and we saw this problem over there. So my co-founder had an interesting story. His name is Rishabh, and he actually never went to college, and he was already working over there for the last 4 years. Even though we were of the same age, he had like 4 years more work ex than me.
All right.
And when we started working on projects together, that's when we saw that, operations teams inside, a lot of delivery, logistics, mobility companies, like companies that have their operations on the ground, they don't have a SaaS product that is specialized for them.
Correct.
But when we looked at every team in a company, from your marketing to sales to HR to finance to design, we felt like all of them had, specific tools that are built for their needs and their workflows.
Right.
So that is how the idea of Locale was born, because we were already working with teams like that. And we saw that they were using Excel sheets and some internally built products. Can we build a SaaS product for them?
But as you said, for teams that operate on ground,
Yeah.
especially, right?
Yes.
Everybody has their own frameworks.
Yes.
Everybody has their own metrics that they track. Everybody has their own business KPIs that they do. How did you find this? This seems like a more of a tool that you started with,
Yes.
and then it grew out to be a business.
What do you mean by that?
Probably a tool can help me solve a single point problem, right? But when you build a SaaS product as such, it has to agree with scale. It has to
Yes.
agree with customization. It
Yes.
has to agree with complex workflows.
Yes.
So when you got to that point saying, hey, this is not just a tool, right? It's not a single point solution. This can be used across businesses,
Yes.
across ops teams. Ops is boring in general, right? I've been an ops person too, very initially when I did internships. And I was like, maybe I'll do something in life, but not ops.
Okay.
So
fair.
ops is a bit daunting and boring. But then
Yes.
you figured it out because it's a bottleneck for teams, as you said.
Yes.
How did you figure out it's not just a tool, but it can be built into a SaaS business?
Yeah, when we started, we didn't know that. But our eventual goal was, can we figure out those patterns across different companies that
Right.
we can productize?
Right.
And to even answer the question that you asked me, how did we go about building our MVP? When we started pitching, so we were in our notice periods, and we, slowly started coming
So
up with the
notice
idea.
period from internship, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Like I worked over there as a full-time person for like 2-3 months.
Okay.
And mostly Rishabh had a longer notice period because he was working over there for a while. So we used to just call people and pitch on LinkedIn, or even, cold call them and say, we've built this product.
Huh.
This already exists, and, would you want a demo? So the whole idea was, how do we pitch before we even build, actually,
Okay.
to get understanding of whether people want this or not. So we always, like, sales and marketing always moved 2 steps in advance, as compared to product and engineering, because this takes a longer time to build and ship.
That's very smart actually, because a lot of tools today are there where you put your idea out to even validate, like if there is a market for this.
Yeah.
A lot of founders do the opposite. They build, they show an MVP,
Yeah.
they spend years and months, and then they
Yes.
go and say, hey, but this doesn't serve my
Yes.
purpose. So your strategy was that I'm
Yes.
gonna go out, figure out if there's a market, good
Yes.
enough of a market for
Yes.
this.
Yes.
If-
Do people want it? If yes, what do they exactly want it for? How are they using it today? And would they pay for it?
Okay, so amazing. You got those insights of what is your competition, what is your TAM,
Yes.
and if you have a product market fit. All of those metrics you got pretty early on.
I won't say that was a measure of product market fit. It was a good enough, it gave a good enough pulse for us to
Pulse.
go and start building.
Right.
You cannot say you have product market fit
Right.
unless and until you actually have demand that you're not able to serve anymore.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, I think it gave us enough validation.
Tell me a couple of pitch calls or cold calls that you did. How did you go about it? Obviously, as you said, you found people on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Who match your persona per
Yes.
se of who you're trying to solve
Yes.
for, and then how would your typical conversation go by?
Yeah, so I still remember, damn, this was so long back, but we actually made a list of companies, right? And in each of these companies, we wrote who our ICP was.
Okay.
And what I tried to do was figure out, if anyone I know in that company was from my college, or, even if they were not, is there a mutual connection between us, right? So I sort of figured out those hacks, and again, as a business person, that is your job and that is what
Yeah.
you're supposed to do. So, and if not, I would just cold DM them or cold call them, right? And I would just say, hey, I'm Aditi from Locale.ai, and I've been working on this product, and I've been building this, and this is what it does. It helps ops teams, become more proactive in their journey, and this is how it works. Is it something that you would be interested in? Would you like a demo? So I still remember, it's a very funny story. This person, he was like, yeah, that sounds very cool, but can you send me your website? And I was like, yeah, sure, you'll have it by the end of the day. And we didn't even have one. But then I told him, that it was a Friday. And I told him, I'll send it over to you on Monday because, you should enjoy your weekend. And I remember we coded the entire website over the weekend and then sent it over. And a lot of the things that we have done in the first, I would say 6 to 8 months was a lot of hacked on
Got
processes like
Got
this.
it. Got it. That's a fun story. Did you end up converting them though?
We did get a pilot with them, yes. So it was a little longer than we had expected, because like I said, we didn't have anything.
You're
So
right.
let's say whenever they would ask for a demo, then we had to sit and code it and build it, and then we would go back. So it took a little while, but throughout the process, we were in constant touch with our customers to really understand what it is that they wanted.
As you said, figuring out the pulse and sort of reverse engineering it
Yes.
across, it
Yes.
helped you. I'm really curious because, as I said, I'm not a big fan of ops in general. How do you show ROI for your product? Because how do you show ROI for ops products? Is it efficiency? Is it time saved? Is it man costs?
So we had two products actually that we had built for operations teams. Do you want me to tell you for both of them, or
We'll go product by product.
okay? So our first
Probably that'll help us figure out what Locale did together as
Sure.
a enterprise as such.
Sure.
So we'll do that.
Sure. So our first product was actually, like, the way we explained it was a mixed panel, but for operations. So the idea was, mixed panel helps you understand your web products and your website, right? Like, where are visitors dropping? Where are they? What is the funnel like? But let's say for a business that has a huge part of their ops on the ground,
Right.
let's say a company like Swiggy or a Zomato, they would want to also understand how is their ground performing, how are their different areas performing, what does the supply demand gap look like at different times of the day, different days of the week, and all of that. So it was a map based visualization and an analytics product. So for that product, the way we used to measure ROI was, it was more in terms of before Locale, how much time and effort were the analysts spending to sit and just keep recreating those reports and those dashboards. And with those insights that you got, ultimately, how was, let's say, your business improving?
Got it.
So we used to, let's say, work with Bounce, right? The bike company. At that moment, their business model was different. But for example, one of the projects that they did with our product was they helped understand where should they open their bike centers.
Got it.
Right? So we basically used a lot of metrics like, latent demand, which means where are people opening the app, installing the app already, where are people dropping off. So using all of those metrics, we figured out, okay, these are good primarily locations for them. So one was on the effort and the cost side, the other was on the business matrix side.
Got it.
Our second product was essentially the product that we called PagerDuty for operations. So PagerDuty is a product that DevOps teams use to help them understand what's happening with their infra.
Got it.
And anytime, let's say, it goes down, the right person gets alerted, and there's a whole escalation mechanism on top of that. So just like that, for operations teams, anytime there was something going wrong with the business, we would detect that from their data, and we would inform the right person in the team. And if they are not able to solve it, it would get escalated up the hierarchy chain, essentially. So it was an alerting plus a ticketing product.
Okay, that's great because in ops, what everybody reports on is always lagging indicators.
Exactly.
Nobody really thinks about leading indicators
Yes.
to tell the business what should they be earlier prepared
Yeah,
for.
what they should be proactive about. Exactly. And this was actually our learning. So you talked about pivot, right? Like, when we built this product and when people were using this, we actually realized that, ops teams don't even have the bandwidth to sit and get insights and use those insights in their decision making,
Right.
because they were firefighting all the time. And ops world is so chaotic, like something or the other was breaking every single day. They were the ones who asked us, hey, can you actually, instead of me sitting and doing this, can you just give it to me on my Slack or on my WhatsApp? That this is breaking and this is something I need to solve. So the second idea actually came from the market itself.
It's fair because in enterprise businesses at scale, especially when you operate, every second counts.
Yes, exactly.
The escalation numbers, your ticket numbers are literally measured in seconds.
Yes.
Your first touch point till your resolution has to be flawless for companies and clients to love you.
Yep.
So having leading indicators is super important in ops. Then there was another product for PagerDuty that you
Yes,
said,
yes.
which helps with infra, which is also super
Yes,
important
yes.
because I know who fixes it is DevOps and infra, but who flags it is still ops.
Yes.
Buck stops still with ops.
Yes.
So they are accountable. So
Yes.
that makes sense. What was the market size for your first MVP? And what was your
Yeah.
second MVP market
So the
size?
first, for the first product, we wanted to focus on only ground businesses.
Only
So
ground
let's say your delivery, mobility, logistics, which included your intercity. So it's called, interhaul logistics, or even 3PL partners and all of that. So that was the market size. But what we later learned is that people don't have very good data collected with them in the first place. So that is why, even though we expanded internationally with that product, even in international customers, we realized that the data was not really of that good quality for us to even give that kind of insight. So
Okay.
that's why it's not that the market was small, but I would say the market that we needed for our product to work was small.
Okay.
Yeah. For the second one, it was a more horizontal operations. So it was business operations. So for example, we worked with even edtech companies. So let's say edtech companies that would have online classes. What would happen? Like, I'll tell you a use case. The teacher was supposed to come in the class, but let's say what if the teacher is delayed? So what would happen is students would complain to the business team or the ops team, and then ops team would call the teacher to figure out what's happening. But what we did was we made this completely from reactive to proactive. So from the data, we would see, okay, teacher is not online because they were supposed to mark on their app, right? And if, let's say, it's, the class starts in 5 minutes, and if the person is not there, we directly flag it to the person who manages that classroom.
Okay.
So it was essentially, you could configure any rule because everything was happening via SQL queries.
Okay.
So that's why the product was very horizontal, and it could be any business operations that wanted to be proactive.
Got it. So even though you didn't have a verticalized ops SaaS product as such,
Yes.
but you had configurable workflows
Yes.
for each use case.
For each use case.
So any business that onboarded could use your product in
Yes.
any which way
Yes.
for their bottleneck.
Yes. As long as they have data collected on that. So we even had some customer success use cases on the product. That was not our primary market, but sometimes we would enter a company and they would get really comfortable with the ops teams, and they would be like, can we use this in this use case and that use case also? So it was a very use case agnostic product.
Because a lot of founders get stuck in that. They build for a certain use case which they feel is larger of the TAM that they're serving to.
Yes.
And then when it stops working after a single point, then it's just as good as dead, right?
Yeah.
Then you have to start from scratch again. But this idea of building vertical and configurable, did you learn it through mistakes, or was that always your...
No, definitely learned it through mistakes, because like I said, right, in the first idea, we the market that we had estimated did not turn out to be that big.
Right.
So now I was like, Rishabh and I were like, we don't want this problem ever again. So, let's go horizontal with our product. And one of the tools that we were really inspired by, I don't know if you know, they're called Retool.
Okay.
And
tell us about what.
So
it does.
Retool is actually used by a lot of developers and engineers, and a lot of, like, the replacement for Locale in a lot of these companies was Retool. So developers would build products for operations teams using Retool. So but it was, again, Retool was a very horizontal product, and they had sort of gone after the same market as us. So we sort of took inspiration, and we were like, let's build a Retool like product, but not something that is dependent on these like developers and engineers to build for operations.
Okay. You mentioned something about customer success stories. So probably your CSAT was one of your metrics that you tracked, saying, hey, the product is working.
Yes.
What other one or two North Stars that you had which gave you a sort of validation, saying, I know there is ROI for my business because there is ROI for client's business.
Right.
Tell me one or two metrics that showed you that.
Definitely. I think for the second product, the metrics that we captured were, so because every time, let's say, an alert would get flagged, you would have to solve that problem. So you could measure whether the issue was being resolved or not. And later we'd build this intelligence as to, if, let's say, you solved the problem on the ground, that would get reflected on the data. So we would automatically resolve the ticket as well. So
Yeah.
Depending on the use case, you could manually resolve issues or automatically resolve issues. But at the end of the day, we could see what is the percentage of issues that were getting resolved on time.
So good CSAT, higher number of resolution of
Yes.
tickets for you. That so
Yes.
speed was your
Speed and
speed and accuracy as well
Yes.
together as
Yes.
were modes.
yes, and
basically.
ultimately that again helps with customer satisfaction for the business also, right? Because now you don't have to get complaints and solve problems. You can just solve them on your own.
That's good. You also mentioned that you expanded this. I know you have done it across 9 countries now.
Yes.
This definitely validates for a problem in Indian setting. I can see how, because of how much data, scale, messy teams, and you mentioned Bounce. All of these are starter companies which had a lot of things to figure out, especially when they started out in general. So even they needed a partner to help with it. But when you scale to that size, it means they have systems in place. It means they know what they're doing. So how did you, what were those indicators which showed you this can be an international or a like an international product?
Yeah, so when we were validating, we did speak with a bunch of international companies also. Not much, again, and that is something I would change now going forward if I ever do this again. So we did validate in that phase also. But when we started, when our product was built and we had a few customers in India and we were getting really good feedback from them, I think that's when we started going international. So we started selling to all of these companies, and that's when we realized that this is not a solved problem in general for ops teams, because like I said, there wasn't any product in the world that existed for this particular team.
Got it.
So people were solving this through Excel sheets, some internal products that were built on Retool, like the tool I mentioned, or there was this analytics product called Tableau. So people were using that.
Yeah, especially for dashboards to get
Dashboards,
insights
yes.
and what's happening, because that's basically what ops does anyways.
Yes, but again, all of these products were not built for the things that operations teams wanted at the end of the day. So we could see that there was a very clear need and a pain point, and it just the quality, not the quality, the success of the company dependent on our execution as a team.
Why do you think in hindsight nobody built for ops?
See, that's why we finally, then that was the third pivot also for us, right? Because we ultimately discounted this market because we were like, it's very hard to build for this market. Because ops teams actually do not have decision-making power for some reason. I mean, I understand the reason, but the problem was that one, they don't have the budget. And second, for every sale that we were doing, we had to involve a bunch of stakeholders and we had to get buy-in from everyone. So it was basically becoming a unit economics problem where they could not pay for the product, but they could they were not able to pay enough to justify the sales cycle that we were incurring, because we had to get the head of product involved. Who would give the budget. The use case would come from head of ops. Sometimes there would be a head of finance who would give a final go ahead. So it was becoming very messy and very long sales cycle. So ultimately we realized, and this was not an India problem, because internationally that was happening.
That is how ops is structured within a company in general.
Exactly. And we had competitors in Europe, in US, both, and all of them again shut down. Because that was also a proof point for us to say that this is not an India problem, this is a global problem where ops teams don't have the budget and they can't move fast. So ultimately we just decided to move away from this market.
Even now the problem still stands unsolved for businesses.
Yes, which is what the thing was, throughout my journey with Locale, I was never once told that this is not a real problem. But what I realized was that sometimes problems exist, but people are not willing to pay enough to solve that.
Did you also wear it as a badge of honor, or was it just a natural course or a consequence of what you did that came into existence?
I think it's so weird, growing up, yeah, like you said, that used to be such a big thing for me as well. And I thought to myself, maybe someday I will also have it. But when we did, when Rishabh and I got into the list, I mean, it did feel really surreal, but it was more surreal for our team and our friends and our family and our parents than I think it played on us. It was definitely surreal, and it's definitely helped us a lot in our journeys.
Because for founders today also, getting into lists, getting into recognitions is also such a vanity metric, I feel.
Right.
If you're made into a certain list, then you're successful, otherwise you're not. Do you attest to that it's a vanity metric, or you feel there's real gratification? Or as you said, it's gratification for team, probably.
I don't think it's a vanity metric, but having said that, see, a founder journey is a very hard journey. It's a very lonely journey for you, even for the team, right? Like the team that has joined sort of and has taken that risk because they've sort of bought into that story with you. And even actually for family and for friends, right? Like because like I said, like as a founder, I don't think you have a normal life, which means, you know, your parents don't see you that often, your friends don't see you as often, right? So I think, like I said, it's sort of a testimony to all of these people who have sacrificed on behalf of you, number one. Number two, I think, you know, it's also it sort of validates this journey that you're on. You know, sometimes when you have low days or hard days and you doubt and you ask yourself, hey, what's the point of doing this, right? When everyone around me you know, is moving on with their lives and sort of going ahead with their milestones in life, like why am I still doing that? I think you can use this as a positive force in your life, right? To help you move forward. But for me, I think the definition of success is very different. But yeah, I think these help. I'm not going to say that they don't.
Give us a few examples.
I think, like, you know, in the publishing world, for example, like I was so new to this world and I had no idea, I had no connections. I didn't know any author personally. So when I started talking to publishers and I introduced myself and I told them that, you know, this is what I do and this is who I am, and I also got awarded, you know, this title, you know, everyone sort of takes you more seriously. Unfortunately, that is how the world works. The projects I get now, my consulting projects, like when I talk to investors, like all of it does play a role, right? And I think ultimately it's up to you as to how you utilize it, right, in the right way, shape and form. It's like, you know, when you come from a prestigious college, for example, how you can use it to your advantage, right? You can not use it to your advantage because people have a certain perception that is attached to, let's say, your college. So how do you use it? I think it ultimately depends on that.
Co-founder conversations when it comes to exits, when you part ways on a certain venture together, it's quite hard to have those conversations. So how did you and Rishabh face this consequence of, okay, it's probably time to pivot for good now from the industry?
I think that is where we were both very aligned on from the start, that, you know, we wanted to build a big business. We wanted to build a venture capped business. And a lot of people told us, you know, when we in our first idea, when we started making revenue, that we could have just kept going on like that. I mean, if we wanted, we could have built a profitable business and kept running. But that is something we didn't want to do because we wanted to build something much bigger. I think we were very aligned always that, you know, this is not working out during both the pivots. And even when we, you know, when we did the third idea and we decided to finally step down, I think we were both very aligned that, you know, we don't want to, like, we're not in the headspace to do like another 0 to 1 journey all over again. So yeah, I think it was just, I guess I was very lucky that way.
So co-founder mentality match is a real thing.
100%. It's the most important thing, I would say. If you have a co-founder, it's the most important thing that can make or break your business.
I'll still like to pose this question once again. If you'd want to retry this idea again today, in hindsight, with all the learnings that you have and the coachings that you do for other founders, which we'll come to in a bit, what would you have changed?
The only thing I could have changed is gotten to the same conclusion faster, but the conclusion would have been the same, which is a factor or a characteristic of the market we were in. Yes. And if we would have gotten to this faster, maybe we would have had a little bit more rigor to do maybe a third idea, probably in a much better health and spirit, I would say. But I don't think the conclusion would have been any different. There was no issue with our execution whatsoever.
Anybody who's building in the ops space now, what would you tell them?
It's a very slippery slope. So they need to have a really good insight on the GTM bit, like how are they planning to scale this. And I think the only way this would work is going enterprise. So if they are in the enterprise space, then what is their unit economics like, what is their market size, what is their sales cycle, ACV, all of that I would really want to understand.
So go data driven hard on the
Yes.
amount of data that you take for a business and then start from there. That's what your suggestion would be.
Yeah, especially in the GTM side, I think the product building and the tech, I think, is become much easier now, especially with AI.
Yeah.
So how are you planning to sell this, get this in front of your customers and then scale it from there? I think that is something I would really, like to see some sort of unique insight on.
After you exit with Locale, I know now that you have a community, a big community of your own, 40, 50K people
Yeah.
of your own that you've found your tribe for. And what you do essentially now is that help with GTM
Yeah.
for B2B, SMBs,
Yeah.
SaaS founders. Who is your audience and what do you plan to achieve with it? What is your vision with the whole thing?
I don't think it's going to be a very long term thing, but while I'm on my sabbatical, like one of the things I've been doing is just working with founders on specific challenges that they are facing in their journey. So I'm working someone to help them out with their GTM. I'm working with someone else to help them out with their fundraise. This is just something that we sort of figure out. Okay, this is going to be the problem statement, and this is what success looks like, and how do we go from point A to point B. So this is what I'm working on. Mostly they are all B2B customers, founders. But I've been also, sort of just doing a little bit of coaching for people who are, a little bit in terms of an identity crisis, I would say, where they are in their career, they're doing something for a long time, but they don't really know if that is something that they want to do, and helping them figure out what it is that they want to do and how should they transition. So I just do this to mostly give back to the community. But again, if it's a long-term engagement, then we get into a more formalized structure.
Out of all the founders that you help with or coach as well, what are the one or two big industries that you see booming that they're building in?
Verticalized AI products are really doing very well in the B2B space. So people are basically, they have taken up one process or one industry, and they have really figured out how do we automate this whole workflow. So the way people are doing this is either they are picking up a function, whether that's an SDR or whether
Yeah.
that's an HR, and they are automating that, or they are picking up an industry, which is, let's say, legal world, and then they are figuring out, okay, how does a new law firm which is completely driven by AI look like?
Haru AI.
Yes, they are one of the first companies to do that.
You are absolutely right. Verticalization is the way to go now
Yes.
with AI, and that's
Yes.
what is winning. In the same stride, what are the couple of things that you did as a mistake that you see founders doing as well, even today?
I think these mistakes everyone, I feel, does, and it's okay because that's how you learn. I think different stages, different mistakes. For example, in the early stage, I've seen people don't validate that well, and still, like, even I was in SF last year and I spent a lot of time with founders over there as well, and even there, people were going product first and feature first and not pitching their product in terms of what is the outcome for the end customer.
You still see that happening?
I still see that. I still saw that happening so many times that I got so annoyed, honestly. I think this is a classic mistake people do in the beginning. I think in the mid stage, I feel people always feel like they need more people to get work done. So ultimately, and this is a mistake we also made, so I'm guilty of this as well, but we overhired a lot of people, even when we felt like we didn't need them. I don't know, it just gives you some sort of insurance. I don't completely understand why I did that now, but again, this is something I see everyone does. Secondly, I feel a big mistake everyone does is that they don't let go of people soon enough. And once you've hired someone, you just keep trying to make it work,
Fix it
and
up.
it just never works. It never works, and you just don't do that fast enough. So very common mistakes, everyone does it. I feel, let them do it, that's how they will learn.
So no tips on, hey, just don't do this at all.
I have told this to founders, don't let go of these people or don't overhire. But I feel like you know, it's very hard to understand their psychology from the outside in, because when you're in that place, you're in a different kind of mindset and pressure, right? And you feel, you know, if more people will give you that kind of solace and that comfort that you need, maybe let's say you have a fear that so and so person might leave, so I need another person. If they leave, then what, company will not work, right?
Especially for smaller teams, that's
Smaller
a
teams,
very big issue.
yes. So you know, these kind of fears people have, and it's very very hard to untangle them. So there are a lot of these fears and anxieties that are playing underneath these decisions, and again, like when you are going so fast and there's so many things on your plate, you don't even have time to sort of dissect that and figure out why I'm doing these
Right.
things, right? Which is why I'm saying it's, you know, it's like saying, hey, don't be in a toxic relationship. But when you do end up in one, you tell yourself that, hey, this is not toxic.
Yeah.
But everyone else around you sees that, hey, that's not right for you. It's
Right.
kind of similar to that.
So there's just one way of figure it out. When you get to the bridge, you cross it.
You cross it, yeah. And I think it's fine. Like, I don't think, you know, you should optimize the founder journey to not make mistakes. I think you should optimize the founder journey to iterate and move fast.
Faster.
Yeah.
That's a very good insight. Founder journey is more about the learning that shapes you as an individual and persona, which then goes on to dictate what your brand does anyways.
Exactly.
So in this space, especially iteration, as you said, and velocity is all that you have control on.
100%.
I'll shift gears a bit. Your life is a little bit like how Locale was, where you have pivoted
Yeah.
from being a founder to a couple of things that we know today. You coach on your sabbatical, you try to be that mirror to founders that you did not have probably
Yes,
in the
yes.
early days. You also authored a book that I know, I think got published around a month
Yes.
and a half back.
Yes.
You also are a poet, so a lot to unpack here on the other side of who you are as a person.
Yeah.
Let's start with the book. I'm excited actually because my dad was a journalist and he's authored a couple of books.
Oh,
So it's a topic of interest for me as well on a personal level. So we'll start with, why did you decide to be an author, or was it always hidden with you and it just came out much later?
I always wanted to be an author. I just didn't know that, you know, this would be the year that I would possibly publish my book. But this was honestly a dream that I had since I was a kid, because books have always been my source of comfort a lot of times. I think when I am down or low, words are what I gravitate towards, that sort of help me feel better in life. I always wanted to do this, and I have been writing for a long time now. For the past 5 years. So when I took a step back and I started writing a lot more, that's when, you know, it hit me that it'll be so interesting to combine all of these pieces into a book. The work was to figure out how to sort of combine all of these pieces that they together form a spine and a coherent story. So I did a lot of work on that. But that is the seed, you know, through which it all started.
Okay.
And yeah, here we are.
What is your book about? Who is it for? What can we learn from it? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah,
about it.
sure. I'll probably show you. So this is what the book is called. It's called Things I Learned While Falling Apart.
Okay.
It's a collection of short stories, poetry, tiny essays. It's written over the period of the last 5 years, actually.
Okay.
The way I imagined this book was, you know, because that's how I would like to read. You know, you come back home after a very long day at work, and then you just take your glass of wine or coffee and then sit with the book and go on a date with this book.
Okay.
You know, and you know how different days feel so different. So I wanted to have a book that sort of caters to all of those different days and emotions. So there are essentially 5 parts to this book. There's an intense part, there's a feel good part, there's a funny part, there's a part that will make you, there are questioning parts. Basically, they question a lot of things in the society. So, you know, depending on the mindset and the zone you're in, you figure out, okay, what do you want to read that day. And
It's a bit of a proxy for a founder journey as well. Every day is
possibly
different.
Yes.
Every day is unique.
Yes.
And then you come back and I'm like, I've had such a shit show of a day. I just want to read something feel good.
Feel good.
Like,
yes.
can I do that?
Yes, exactly.
And probably I'm feeling low couple
Yes.
of days now. How do I get back into the
Yes,
loop? So
yes.
is that
Yes,
the way
exactly.
you approached it?
Exactly, and that's why you'll find all sorts of pieces here. And I wanted it to be a very different experience for the reader. So I always wanted to have a very heavily illustrated book.
Okay.
So if you actually see, I worked with a friend of mine, and we have essentially illustrated every page of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a very beautiful book, I would say, and it's an experience essentially.
That's nice. For founders as such, do you feel there are types of founders who find visual learning, visual interaction much better to work with, or
I'm not sure about that, but the way the product I wanted to create was something that combined. So I'm very passionate about combining different art forms together. So in the book, for example, I wanted to play with words along with imagery
okay?
together, because that gives me a lot of joy. Just like, for example, in my shows also, we combine spoken poetry and music together. Yeah, that is something that I am really passionate about, and I wanted to create a product that reflects that.
That's good. That's good. But if I were in your position, I don't know, probably whoever is listening to this may also feel that stepping out from the shadows of, hey, I've been a founder for so long, to something else, you'll have a bit of an identity crisis there.
Yes, for sure.
Is it real?
100%. I think what helped me was, because this was a conscious decision that we took to step away, return our capital to investors and all of that, I probably was a little prepared that this is going to happen. Obviously, I was experiencing that is a different journey in
Yeah.
itself, I would say. Just knowing, okay, this might happen versus going through that is very, very different. But it did help that I was prepared mentally. And I took time with it, that because looking back, I think my identity was so linked to this startup that it took me a while to just untangle from it, and then ask myself, who am I without this startup? And when I gave myself the time, that's when a lot of these things started coming out from me, that hey, it's not necessary that just I only don't have in me to build a company. I can also build all of these different create these different things that I want to. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster for sure.
And all of these other sort of interests that you have add dimensions to you as a founder too. Is that
100%.
something that you tell to your own mentees that you have as well?
I think everyone should have a channel of expression, and that necessarily does not have to be writing, right? Like I have friends who paint, I have people who sculpt, right? But this brings me to the point of, why is art important for us? I feel like art exists because there are things that you want to express from inside you that want to come out. And when you create your art, you are telling the world, this is my point of view and this is what I believe in, right? And not just for a founder. I think each and every one of us should have that. And whether you do that as a hobby, I did it as a hobby for so many years. I never knew this will, like, I used to go and perform my pieces in open mic, just as a thing, right? I would do on weekends, but I never knew that someday that would accumulate and happen, like convert into a show of my own. So that takes natural progression. And again, no matter how or where life takes you, you can keep doing that. But I think a mode of expression is really, really important for all of us.
Right. As you reflect on your sabbatical now, and obviously you've been in this space in terms of mentoring and consulting, do you see yourself starting up again?
I don't know, to be honest. And I am not sure what I'm going to do next. And I am not trying to rush into that decision, because the thing that I'm going to do next, I again want it to be a long-term thing. So I want it to come to me. So I'm a very intuitive person, like that's why I'm waiting that when my intuition gives me a go ahead, okay, you're ready to go back into that journey. Yeah. And I think secondly, I would want to be a different person as compared to who I was. I mean, of course I'm still a different person, but there are things I actively wanted to work on. When I took a step back, I knew these are the things I want to work on, because that would make me a better leader. I
What
feel
would those things be?
a lot of things.
In general, if somebody has to, obviously, every leadership role, every founder roles steps you into another form of control or expertise or direction, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are some essentials that people should do to figure out what kind of leaders they are, what kind of founders they will be?
You should just take up that role, and again, a lot of leaders, what they say is that, you don't need to be appointed a leader to behave like one. A leader is someone who takes initiative and gets things done, and maybe if needed gets people on the same page, right? So, if this is something you are interested in your current, even in your household or even at your workplace, you can take up projects, and you can drive things end to end, and I would say that is also the job of a leader. So, and once you do, a lot of people will start recognizing it, and you will be promoted maybe to a formalized leadership role. But I think the gift of having a leadership role under your belt is that it will really help you understand the things that you're good at and the things that you are not good at. And hopefully, if you keep doing that, you will figure out how to play to your strengths a lot more, and how do you compensate for your weaknesses in terms of finding the right people to do those things. I think the best leaders in the world are empathetic, and number two, they are very self-aware and very reflective. I think if you can manage those two ingredients, I think you can be a pretty good leader.
That's a good insight right there. So, in conclusion, to what's ahead of you is you're just gonna wait it out, see what's coming
Yes.
to you.
Yes.
I was expecting a more strategic answer in terms of, I know with all my mentorships and coaching that these are 2 to 3 areas that are booming, which I want to go and attack. Do you have anything like that in
I mean,
hindsight?
I am interested in a bunch of areas, but I'm not that kind of person who comes out and says, hey, like I am
This
okay.
is working, let me build there.
Yeah, and I'm very attached to the things I do. Just because an area is booming that is not a only factor for me to go and pursue that. Like, I need to feel connected to it as well. Um, and I'm very comfortable with saying I don't know, and I'm okay with not knowing, and I'm
Yeah.
okay with uncertainty.
Yeah.
What I've seen is that it makes other people really, really uncomfortable because they are not okay with uncertainty.
Sure, because every time you talk about a new idea or a journey that you're going to embark, the first thing people will say, I don't think this is working. I don't think this is the thing now. I don't think people are going to look at you and solve this for you. So,
Right.
when everybody's so driven around what is the market around this, is this in trend? Is it going to cut it? It's a very different approach.
Yeah.
Kind of approach that will stick, I feel.
Yeah.
Because you're not running behind trends as such. Because today somebody starts an HR tech, then they'll do an ed tech, then they'll do a health tech, and then
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever comes next,
Yeah.
right? So is that also a good indication of a founder that you stick to your guns on who you are as a person and then build your brand from there, or is there no right or wrong?
I think there's no right and wrong because, again, it depends on the kind of person you are. I have learned in the last 1.5 years that this is the person I am, where more than trends, what's important for me is that it should meaningfully speak to me and connect to me, whatever I'm building. Maybe it doesn't have to be true with everyone else. And I don't think that's an important criteria for success as well. But I feel at the end of the day, you should know yourself and who you are, right? Ultimately, everything gets derived from there, which is why, like I said, when people around me are like, hey, but why you not doing why you not going back, why you not building, why you not, you can just take up a job for like a year or two and then go back into building. Earlier it used to really make me anxious, but now I've learned that they are projecting their own anxieties on me, and that is not something that I need to be bothered by.
Yeah, I've sat in on a lot of founder mindset sessions like this because in my own company they do a lot of it. My own company founder does a lot of it. It's a real thing, seeing what others are doing and then what is the way to success. And hey, doing something and showing you're in the market is much better than you going out of sight, out of mind, and coming back and saying, who is this person who is back into the field? So it's a refreshing insight at that.
Yeah, and for example, it's not that I don't have those emotions. Like, it's not like I don't feel FOMO, or it's not like I don't feel what am I doing with, like, I have my days like that. But I think the important thing is to learn how to deal with those emotions instead of being reactive to them, right? So again, that's, like I said, this is one of the things I wanted to work on,
Yeah.
as to not being a servant to my emotions, but let them just be there to give me information and guide me and direct me.
That's also very, very crucial for a founder, because
Yes,
you have
exactly.
to be very still-minded.
Exactly.
Because every day is a roller coaster in that.
Yes. And I was not that person, let me tell you. So, like I said, I want to go back to whatever I'm doing, but I want to be a completely different person than I was.
That's good. So yeah, thank you so much, Aditi. Thank you for being on the show and giving us a lot of insights. I think for me, the biggest learning was, how do you figure out what kind of ideas you have to solve for based on who you are, what you want to do, and a lot of good insights on anybody who's already found what they have to build, what to check for, what to discard at the very beginning, and then
Right.
probably not do mistakes, but mistakes faster
Yes.
and not slower.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being on the show. I enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.